So I wrote this blog post a couple months ago about how to secure your Bitcoin wallet, and it was really just intended to be sort of a general introduction to some best practices, although it's received and continues to receive quite a bit of traffic. Now, some people have asked me if I could go into more detail about how to create a secure cold storage wallet. And doing so is kind of outside the scope of what I could do in a blog post, so I decided to make a little video tutorial for you guys. Now, as I mentioned in this post, the most secure way to create a cold storage wallet is to use a second computer. If you have a second computer that you are committed to keeping offline permanently, never reconnected to the internet, you could just generate your keys on that computer and then send your bitcoins over to those addresses, and as long as you never reconnect that computer to the internet, it should be impossible for an attacker to steal your bitcoins. Unfortunately, if you're like most people, you don't have access to a second computer that you can keep offline. So this tutorial is for you. I'm going to show you how to use your home computer to securely create a cold storage wallet. Now, I'm going to be demonstrating how to do this in Windows, but you could just as easily do this in OS X or Ubuntu. The steps are pretty much going to be exactly the same. Now, what you need to keep in mind is we need to assume that your computer is compromised, right? Especially if you're using Windows, which is just riddled with malware. You wouldn't want to create a new Bitcoin wallet on a compromised computer. Doing so would just unnecessarily put your Bitcoins at risk. So what we're going to do is we're going to boot into a temporary operating system that we're going to use to isolate our work environment from any malware that might already exist on this computer. And that's what I'm going to show you how to do. To start, you're going to have to get yourself 2 USB flash drives, at least 2. If you want to keep more backups of your keys, you might want to get a couple more. And we're going to install a Linux Live system, an operating system, on one of those flash drives, right? So it's not going to install on your computer's hard drive. We're going to install it on a flash drive, and we're going to boot into that operating system directly from the flash drive. So first thing we need to do is download the operating system, and the operating system we're going to use for this purpose is Tails. Okay, Tails is a Linux live system. It stands for the Amnesic Incognito Live System. Here's the URL here, or you could just Google it. The reason why I recommend Tails as opposed to any of the other Linux distributions is because Tails is specifically configured to prevent security leaks, right? So we're not going to be using the internet when we're in Tails, but if you do, all of your internet traffic is encrypted and routed through Tor. Tails, it doesn't use your computer's hard drive at all. So the entire operating system loads entirely in the memory. And what that means is if you get any malware while you're using Tails, or if there are any records of the keys that you generated while you're in there, when you restart your computer, the entire memory gets wiped, and there's no record of you ever using Tails at all. Okay, so this will completely protect you from any malware that you might already have on your computer. So to download Tails, we're just going to click this link over here, and then we are going to download the ISO file. Now, if you know how to use PGP, you probably want to download the signature as well and the Tails signing key. So you can verify the integrity of this ISO image. Now, if you don't know what PGP is, it's probably a good idea to Google it, although a PGP tutorial is outside the scope of what we're doing here. You don't have to check the signature on the ISO file, but it is best practice to do so, just to make sure you're not getting a copy that somebody tampered with. Okay, I'm going to actually cancel this download. This download is going to take a while, and I already have a copy of it here on my hard drive. Next thing we have to download is something called Unibootin. Okay, you can just Google that as well. We're going to use Unibootin to mount the ISO file that we just downloaded to our flash drive. Okay, so I'm just going to pick your operating system and download it. Okay, and there it is. So these are the two things that we're going to need to load our operating system onto this flash drive. Now, before we do that, we are going to want to format our flash drive. So you're going to come over here, just pick your drive, right-click, hit Format. Most flash drives, I believe, come formatted as NTFS. You're going to want to select FAT32. I think if you do this while it's installed as NTFS, I think it's going to give you an error when you try and boot into Tails later. So you have to format it as FAT32. And then just hit Start. Now this is going to completely wipe the flash drive, so if you had anything important on there, you might want to move it onto your hard drive at this point. You can always move it back on later. Hit OK. OK, and formatting complete. Close this out. Now we're going to open Unibootin. Okay, there it is. And you're just going to check this disk image, and we're just going to select our ISO file that we downloaded. This is our Tails operating system. And then you would just select USB drive and pick your drive. Mine is the G drive, so everything is fine. I'm just going to hit OK. And there it goes. So it's installing on the flash drive right now. I'm just going to let that go. Now, the final thing that we need is we're going to need some way of generating the new Bitcoin addresses once we are in Tails. Now, in theory, you could use any Linux version of Bitcoin wallet, but probably the easiest way to do this is to just download a JavaScript file and run it in the browser. So we're going to come over here to bitaddress.org. Okay, now the thing to keep in mind, if you're ever using a browser to generate Bitcoin addresses, you don't just want to generate the addresses in the browser, right? That's a really insecure way of going about doing it. Instead, we're going to download the source code for this web page. We're going to come over here to this link down here for the GitHub repository. We're going to click this download zip file. Okay, and I'm just going to extract this right here. Now, the only file you need out of this group is this one right here, the bitaddress.org HTML file. So at this point, I don't have a second flash drive to demonstrate with, but if you have your second flash drive handy, stick that flash drive into your computer and just drag and drop this file into your flash drive. Okay, and then we're gonna, when we get back into Tails, we're gonna load this in a browser and use it to generate our Bitcoin address. Now, let's see, is Unibootin done? No, not yet. Okay, now just like with the Tails ISO file, you can also check the signature. If you have PGP, you can check the signature on the bit address HTML file. You have his PGP key here, and there's also this version history. The version history is signed, so you could check the signature on this, and then the way that you actually would check the signature on the HTML file that you download is you would hash it with SHA-1 and just check it compared to the hash right here. Okay, how are we coming along here? Almost. Okay, that's it. So now we have the Tails operating system installed on our flash drive, on one flash drive. On the second flash drive, you should have this bitaddress.org HTML file, which we downloaded. And what we're going to do now is we are going to boot into Tails. Now, I'm not going to be able to keep recording while my computer restarts, so I'm going to have to restart the recording once we're in Tails. But before we do that, at this point you should probably go turn off your router. If you're using Wi-Fi, just go turn your router off. If you have a computer plugged into the internet, just unplug the cable. We're not going to need the internet at this point, and you don't want to be connected to the internet when we go into Tails anyway. We're just going to generate the new addresses completely offline. Now, you're just going to restart your computer like normal, and you're going to insert the Tails flash drive that we just created, the flash drive that has Tails installed on it. And the very first screen when your computer restarts, it's that weird looking screen. Mine shows like a Dell logo or something like that. It'll say F2 for setup and F12 for boot options. So just keep tapping F12. Just keep tapping it until a little menu comes up and it'll ask you, what do you want to boot from? Do you want to boot from a DVD, a USB drive? Select boot from USB, and Tails will do the rest. It'll boot entirely into that operating system. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do now, and I'm going to pause the recording, and I will see you back in Tails. Okay, so welcome back. Here we are in Tails. Now we're going to go ahead and generate our Bitcoin addresses while we're in here. So we're going to click on Computer, and then you should have your USB stick with the bit address file on it. Just click on that. And then here's the file. You can just go ahead and double click this and it should open in Iceweasel browser. Okay, and there you go. Alright, so we're going to click on Paper Wallet. Okay, and this will generate the paper wallets right here in the browser. You can see you got the Bitcoin address on the left-hand side and the private key on the right. Now, the only thing about the way this is formatted right here is that the private key is just sitting on the paper wallet in plain text, right? So if someone were to discover your stash of paper wallets, they could easily just steal your Bitcoin. So instead, what we are going to do is we are going to print these out using a BIP38 encrypted private key. Alright, so we're going to check off BIP38 encrypt, and then we're going to select a passphrase. Now, you want this passphrase to be very, very long and random, so that it's difficult to brute force, right? If you're using normal letters and characters, maybe 14, 15 different characters. I'm just going to go with a default password here just to demonstrate. Now, how many paper wallets do you want to print out? I would suggest you probably shouldn't just print out one. And the reason for that is you don't want to send all of your Bitcoins to a single address. Because let's just say you own 100 Bitcoins, right? That's over $100,000. If let's say you just wanted to spend one Bitcoin, well, just to spend that one Bitcoin, you have to remove the entire amount from cold storage and import it into a hot wallet, putting your funds at risk, just to spend that one Bitcoin. So a better way of going about doing it would be to maybe generate 10 Bitcoin addresses and split up your funds between them, maybe 20, right? Maybe you want to do 5 Bitcoins on each address. It's really up to you, but it would be much better to do that than to put them all in a single paper wallet. Okay, so then you're just going to want to go and click on Generate. And then it's going to perform a number of tests to encrypt the keys. Okay, and there you go, and you'll see that the paper wallets turned blue. This is because they're now encrypted, right? And you'll see that the private key over here on the right hand side, it now begins with the number 6, right? So any private key that begins with a 6 is an encrypted private key. If you were going to import this private key or import your cold storage addresses back into a wallet, most wallets will allow you to import a BIP38 private key. When you just copy and paste the key into the wallet, it'll prompt you for your password. So whatever passphrase you entered, you would just enter it at that point. Now, I say most wallets support the BIP38. It's probably not all of them at this point, but BIP38, it stands for Bitcoin Improvement Proposal. This is sort of a standard that has been developed, so I expect if all wallets don't support it right now, at some point in the future they will. Alright, so we're just going to click print here. Now, because we are in Tails, you don't have any printer drivers installed or anything like that. We're not going to be able to print directly from Tails. So instead, you're just going to click Print to File, and this is going to save it as a PDF. Okay, and you're just going to save it in your USB stick. And then when you click Print, it'll just save it. Alright, so you can close this out, and there you go. There's the PDF file on your USB stick. You open it up, there you are. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we are going to restart back into Windows, and we're going to print out this PDF file. But we're not going to reconnect to the internet just yet, so your router should be off right now. When you restart into Windows, just keep it off and we'll reconnect later on. Okay, so to restart, you're just going to go click on this little icon on the top right over here and just hit reboot, and I'll do that and I'll see you back in Windows. Here we are back in our regular operating system. Notice we still haven't reconnected to the internet. We're not going to do that just yet. And the final thing we have to do is just print out the paper wallets that we created. Okay, should be right there on our flash drive, and there they are. So you're just going to click print. Now, if you typically connect to your printer through your Wi-Fi, that is, you use wireless printing, I'm going to recommend for this purpose that you connect to your printer with a USB cable rather than fiddling around with the Wi-Fi. And the reason for that is you don't want to connect to the internet and give an attacker the opportunity to snag this file. Okay, your private keys are encrypted, so unless they can get your password, they still shouldn't be able to spend your bitcoins, but you don't want to give them the opportunity to try to brute force your password. Okay, so just connect with a regular USB cable. After you print out this file, you're going to want to store your paper wallets in some way that protects them from moisture or from getting wet, so you might want to throw them in a plastic bag, or maybe laminate them, or whatever else you come up with. Okay. Now, you're also going to want to copy your Bitcoin addresses down somewhere. So you can copy them like this. It's kind of a little awkward. Or you could use the QR code. And just throw those Bitcoin addresses in a file, maybe store it on your desktop. That way you have them handy when you go to send the Bitcoins from your hot wallet to these paper wallets later on. Okay. Notice you're still going to have this PDF file on your USB drive, and I'm going to recommend keeping it there as a backup. Okay, so if anything happens to the paper wallets that you print out, you still have your flash drive as a backup. And again, you could use multiple flash drives here. If you wanted more than one backup, just copy this file to the other flash drives. Now, if someone does access your flash drives, they can open this file and they can at least know that you've got bitcoins on it. They won't be able to spend them because the keys are encrypted. But if you wanted to make it so that that there was no way to tell that this was a Bitcoin-related file, you could just encrypt it, right? You could use AES, you could encrypt it with your PGP key, you could even use TrueCrypt to create a hidden volume on this flash drive, and then just drag this file into the hidden volume, and then no one would even know that there's anything on those flash drives at all. But that's up to you. You can decide what level of encryption you want to use. If you don't encrypt it, that's fine as well, because your private keys are already encrypted. So again, that's up to you. The last thing you have to do here before reconnecting to the internet is, obviously, you're going to remove your flash drive. Okay. And you're just going to restart one last time. And that's just to wipe your computer, wipe the memory of anything that might be saved in it. And then when you get back into Windows, after it reboots, then you can go ahead and reconnect to the internet. Now, before you send your bitcoins to the paper wallets that you just generated, go ahead and put the paper wallets in whatever place you're going to be storing them. So if you're going to be storing them in a safe deposit box, go put them in the safe deposit box first before sending the bitcoins to those addresses. Right? You're not going to want to be driving down the street with tens of thousands of dollars worth of bitcoin on you. Okay. So put the empty paper wallets in the safe deposit box first, and then when you get back to your computer, send the bitcoins to those addresses. Okay, so that's it. That's how to create a secure cold storage address on your home computer. If you do it this way using the Tails operating system, you can be reasonably sure that you've created it securely, and no one should be able to steal your bitcoins. If you have any questions, I'm going to put my email in the description. Feel free to shoot me an email. Thanks.
Bueno, hoy me vino una idea. Today I got an idea. What you can do to lo que también tú puedes hacer. Bueno, que en realidad todo el mundo puede hacer si quiere. Actually, what everybody can do if you want. En este momento el precio de Bitcoin es muy económico. At the moment the price of Bitcoin is very cheap. Pero casi todo el mundo tiene muy poco dinero para invertir. But almost everybody has very little money to invest. Debería decir que esta idea me vino hoy especialmente cuando vi otra vez una chica ahí pidiendo dinero por la calle. Actually, I must say first, this idea today I got especially when I saw again one girl begging for money in the streets. Me gustaría ayudar, pero yo tampoco me sobra mucho el dinero. I would really like to help everybody, but I don't have either too much money. And así que me vino la siguiente idea. So I got the following idea. Es más bien un juego. It's rather a game. Lo que es muy importante, elegir un monedero de Bitcoin que solo tú misma tienes la llave privada. What is very important to choose Bitcoin wallet company which you only possess the private key. For example, blockchain.info. Por ejemplo, la empresa blockchain.info. Luego imprimir en papel la llave privada y también guardarlo tú mismo. Then to print in paper the private key and of course save for yourself that private key. Bueno, ya estamos imprimiendo, imprime por lo menos 10. So now we are already printing, so at least print 10 directions, 10 direcciones. Luego pones algo de Bitcoin, una cantidad, lo que lo que te da la gana en esta dirección. Then you put some Bitcoin, the amount, whatever you want, in these directions. Y la próxima vez que sales de casa ya tienes algo que dar a los que están ahí pidiendo por la calle. And the next time you go out of the house, you have already something to give for these people who are begging on the streets. Y por ejemplo, y claro, para tus amigos, amigas, and for your friends, of course, eso da motivación a la gente para aprender Bitcoin, y this gives motivation for the people to learn about Bitcoin. Y la parte del juego consiste en lo siguiente, and the game part consists in the following. Explicas a la gente, mira, esta es la clave privada, que es la clave secreta. You explain to the people, look, this is the private key, which must be secret. And you have it, and me, and explicas, esa persona y yo mismo la tiene. Y antes pensaba en 5 años, pero luego cambié un poco de idea de hasta 4 años. First I thought of 5 years, but then I changed my opinion to 4 years. Later explain. Después lo explico por qué. Les dices, mira, tienes 4 años para poner esta cantidad de Bitcoin a otra dirección. Si no lo has quitado después de 4 años, yo lo quito. So you explain them, you have 4 years to take these Bitcoin out of this direction, of this secret key direction. If you don't do it, I do it after these 4 years, so you lose this. It's this part of the game, es la parte del juego. He creado este hashtag BTC4 para hacerlo un poco popular. I created this hashtag BTC4 to make it a little popular. Antes pensaba en 5 años, pero luego cambié a 4 porque te has dado cuenta que en Los Simpson la gente tiene 4 dedos y solo Dios tiene 5 dedos. First, I thought of 5 years, but then I changed my mind to 4 years. Did you notice that in The Simpsons, people have 4 fingers and only God has 5 fingers? I'll show some pictures. Voy a enseñar algunas imágenes de Los Simpsons, de los manos y dedos de Simpsons. Some pictures of the hands and fingers of Simpsons. Pero antes quiero recordar que es muy probable que en también 4 o 5 en los próximos años el valor de Bitcoin puede subir mucho. Just want to remember before that the price of Bitcoin, the value of Bitcoin can rise very much in these next years. Así que si solo pones una cantidad pequeña, más tarde puede ser de gran ayuda. Even if you just put a little small amount, later it can be big help. No solo para, bueno, es un juego. Si la persona lo quita antes de 4 años, es para esta persona, si no, es para ti, si te recuerdas y guardas bien la llave privada. So this is the game part. If the person takes the money out, it's for that person. But if they forget it after these 4 years, you can take it out. And it can be really...
Bueno, imprimir también la llave pública y la llave privada. Y si, por ejemplo, okay, first translate. Print not just the private key, but also the public key. Así que si, por ejemplo, explicas a la gente, mira, si alguna persona quiere enviarte Bitcoin, pero tú no tienes ninguna dirección, así que puedes dar esta llave pública a la persona. Mira, muy bien, la llave pública, no la llave secreta, das a esa persona o cualquier persona y te pueden enviar Bitcoin a esa dirección. So remember, the public key you can give to anybody, and if somebody wants to send you some Bitcoin and this person doesn't have any, so you have already this public address where they can send you Bitcoin. Bueno, ahora voy a enseñar algunas imágenes de los dedos de Simpsons. Now I'll show some pictures of the fingers of Simpson. The 4 fingers, los 4 dedos y 5 dedos de Dios. 4 fingers and 5 fingers of God of Simpsons.
Inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Face the facts, join our hands, make a stand. It's time to gather plans, get the shot, take the chance. Till there is no one left, stay correct to the death. They can't ever break a freedom, we will never let it. The corrupt politics is killing the system. Cynicism is it, and it's everything that you witness. They tell you what to think, make you believe that they're the realness. They feed us full of lies, and yet we always forgive them. It's all conspiracy, and if you're feeding into it, you're the puppet. The government's pulling strings from above you. It's time for the introduction to truth, and let's start a movement. We've all been brainwashed, they believe that we all are stupid. We believe in what we see and whatever our ears are hearing. But if you look close, listen, gather your own opinion, you'll understand all the lies, lines and what's between them. This word is not your oyster, this word is a fucking prison. Come on! what's happening in our nation. No one will stand up for the fear of assassination. So they strip us of everything. We stand there and just take it. I'm scared to make a stand, a false flag operation. Research Illuminati, find out by 9/11. You see they line their pockets, don't believe the lies they tell you. Find and seek the truth, realize we need to do whatever it is we can to protect our livelihood. It's time for us to prove whether conspiracy or not. They owe some explanations to the questions that we got. What are the skull and bones? What is lying beneath all these secretive meats? Got you lying between your teeth. What's with the Bilderberg? I'm burning your effigies. I'm praying to Lucifer. How Satanist can you be? While all of the time praying you believing in the peace just to keep up appearances within Christianity. Come on. Stay strong when they try to shut us down or turn around, let us storm them. We got the warnings, let us march from the morning through the night. We gon' fight and close the eye and overthrow all these damn secret societies. Why we gotta stand for the new world proprieties? The evidence is clear, we're naive to the lies. Illuminati wolves killing sheep in the night. When will we learn? When will we see what is right underneath all our eyes? This whole time realize we've been deceived and they're trying to deplete us. They brainwashed our minds, may our souls stay free from corruption. Never trust them, let them get ahead. Even if we chant a march to the very end. Nevertheless, let them know we will never rest. Till I bid in my Bitrium Noster S. Come on! You'll never take control. Your new world order will lead to none at all.
Google it. The reason why I recommend Tails as opposed to any of the other Linux distributions is because Tails is specifically configured to prevent security leaks, right? So we're not going to be using the internet when we're in Tails, but if you do, all of your internet traffic is encrypted and routed through Tor. Tails, it doesn't use your computer's hard drive at all. So the entire operating system loads entirely in the memory. And what that means is if you get any malware while you're using Tails, or if there are any records of the keys that you generated while you're in there, when you restart your computer, the entire memory gets wiped, and there's no record of you ever. And doing so is kind of outside the scope of what I could do in a blog post, so I decided to make a little video tutorial for you guys. Now, as I mentioned in this post, the most secure way to create a cold storage wallet is to use a second computer. If you have a second computer that you are committed to keeping offline permanently, never reconnect it to the internet, you could just generate your keys on that computer and then send your bitcoins over to those addresses, and as long as you never reconnect that computer to the internet, it should be impossible for an attacker to steal your bitcoins. Unfortunately, if you're like most people, you don't have access to a second computer that you can keep offline. So this tutorial is for you. I'm going to show you how to use your home computer to securely create a cold storage wallet. Now I'm going to be demonstrating how to do this in Windows, but you could just as easily do this in OS X or Ubuntu. The steps are pretty much going to be exactly the same. Now what you need to keep in mind is we need to assume that your computer is compromised, right? Especially if you're using Windows, which is just riddled with malware. You wouldn't want to create a new Bitcoin wallet on a compromised computer. Doing so would just unnecessarily put your Bitcoins at risk. So what we're going to do is we're going to boot into a temporary operating system that we're going to use to isolate our work environment from any malware that might already exist on this computer. And that's what I'm going to show you how to do. So I wrote this blog post a couple months ago about how to secure your Bitcoin wallet, and it was really just intended to be sort of a general introduction to some best practices, although it's received and continues to receive quite a bit of traffic. Now, some people have asked me if I could go into more detail about how to create a secure cold storage wallet. To start, you're going to have to get yourself 2 USB flash drives, at least 2. If you want to keep more backups of your keys, you might want to get a couple more. And we're going to install a Linux Live system, an operating system, on one of those flash drives, right? So it's not going to install on your computer's hard drive. We're going to install it on a flash drive, and we're going to boot into that operating system directly from the flash drive. So first thing we need to do is download the operating system, and the operating system we're going to use for this purpose is Tails. Okay, Tails is a Linux Live system. It stands for the Amnesic Incognito Live System. Here's the URL here, where you could just